my name, and a casual comment from my brother clicked into place. Had I been a fool my whole life? In a matter of hours, I realized the family I'd sacrificed everything for was planning to trap me with a $250,000 lie. My mother, humming a tune as she ironed a tablecloth for a party she thought was mine, was still utterly unaware of the storm I was about to unleash. Before I do, take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if this story earns it. Drop your city and your local time in the comments. I like knowing who's out there. Let me take you back 4 weeks to a cold night, an empty hardware store, and a yellow sticky note I was never supposed to find. I grew up in Hartwell, Ohio, a town of 9,000 people and one stoplight that nobody really obeys. My family has run low hardware on Main Street since 1976. Paint, plumbing fittings, the good kind of work, gloves, a key cutting machine that's older than I am. I left at 18 for accounting school in Columbus, and I never moved back. That's the part everyone in my family remembers. I'm the one who left. I'm the daughter who got a degree, then a license, then a career building cases against people who cook their books. I live 40 minutes away now in a one-bedroom condo I paid for myself with a view of a parking garage and a silence I've come to love. And once a month on a Sunday, I make the 40-minute drive back to Hartwell to do the store's books for free, because somewhere along the way I decided that staying gone meant I owed them my weekends. My mother calls it helping out. I called it penance for a long time. The thing about being the one who left is that you spend the rest of your life trying to prove you didn't really leave. So, I balanced their ledgers. I caught their math errors. I filed their quarterly taxes and never sent an invoice. In 35 years, my family has called me for exactly one reason, and it was never a good one. They call when something is broken. They have never once called to tell me something was going right. I used to think that made me essential. It took me until I was 35 to understand. It just made me convenient. My brother Brandon is 3 years younger than me, and he was born standing in the light. By the time he could walk, my parents had a green canvas apron hanging behind the register with Lel and Son embroidered across the chest in gold thread. He was 18 months old. There was no apron with my name on it. There never has been. I asked my mother once when I was 10 if I could have one, too. She laughed and said the store was more of a Brandon thing. Then she handed me the ring of keys instead. 12 keys on a brass ring. Front door, stockroom, register, the safe, the back gate. Somebody responsible should hold these, she said like it was an honor. It wasn't. It meant I was the one who opened on Saturdays at 6. I was the one who locked up when Dad's back went out. I was the kid kneeling on the cold floor counting the till while Brandon got driven to baseball. My mother has a way of describing us that she's used my whole life. Brandon has the low touch. She'll tell the neighbors, the customers, anyone. He could sell a furnace to a man in July. And then she'll glance at me and add in the same warm voice. And Tuesday has spreadsheets. She says it like a consolation prize. For years, I let it sit there, a small splinter I never bothered to pull. I told myself the apron was just an apron. But you don't hand a 9-year-old a ring of keys because you trust her. You do it because you've already decided which child you'll be proud of. And it isn't the one holding the keys. 2 years ago, the store almost died. A big box hardware chain opened 12 miles out by the highway, and Lowell Hardware bled customers for 8 straight months. The bank threatened to pull the line of credit. My father stopped sleeping. My mother started calling me 3 times a day. And for once, the calls weren't about a tax form. They needed a guarantor. The bank would extend a $60,000 line of credit, but only if someone with real income and real credit put their name behind it. That someone was me. So I drove out to Hartwell, and I did what they asked. I am not a reckless person though, so I did it like an accountant. I had my own attorney, Paul Stebbins, paper the whole thing. The guarantee was limited, capped at the loan amount with a fixed 2-year term ending this spring. The collateral was the store's own inventory and fixtures. Not my condo, not my savings, nothing of mine, but my signature and a promise. I read every line twice. I kept a copy in a labeled folder in a fireproof drawer at home. When my mother saw me 3-hole punch the paperwork at the kitchen table, she shook her head like I'd insulted her. You keep receipts on your own family, She said she meant it as a wound. She said it the way other mothers say, "I'm disappointed in you." I just kept punching holes because in my profession, the people who get destroyed are never the ones who kept receipts. They're the ones who trusted that they'd never need them. I didn't know it yet sitting at that table. But that sentence of hers would come back around, and when it did, I'd finally get to answer it. This spring, I drove out for my usual Sunday with the books, and I could smell the trouble before I opened the first ledger. The store felt wrong. Half the shelves were thin. The good drill bits were gone and hadn't been reordered. 2 vendors had switched the account to cash only, which only happens after you've missed enough checks. I sat at the desk in the back office and ran the numbers, and the numbers were ugly. Revenue down 31% year-over-year. Payables stacked 3 months deep. And there, taped to the wall above the desk where it had hung my whole life, was the store's promotional calendar, the cheap one they print every December with a tractor on it. Except this year, someone had taken a red marker to a date in late May and circled it twice. I knew that date. It was the maturity date on the line of credit, the day the bank's clock ran out, the day the loan came due in full unless it was renewed. Somebody in my family had been staring at that red circle every single day, counting down. Brandon was nowhere in the store. My father told me he was out meeting a supplier, which is the kind of thing Brandon says when he wants to leave early. I flipped through the cash log and noticed the till coming up short on a couple of nights. Small amounts, the kind you'd blame on a teenager. I made a note to look closer next time. Then my phone buzzed on the desk. It was my mother. "Tuesday," she said in the bright, careful voice she uses when she's already decided something. "Your father and I want the whole family together. End of the month. We have something important to discuss." The something important came out 2 days later over a pot roast my mother served like a peace offering. They didn't say it plainly. My family never says anything plainly. My father cleared his throat and talked about legacy about 50 years, about how a man's name on a door means something. My mother dabbed her eyes before there were any tears in them. And then Brandon, who showed up 40 minutes late, leaned back in his chair and said it for them. "We just need you to sign again," he said. "Renew the line. Bump it up a little so we can restock and remodel." "A little?" I asked the number. My father looked at the table. My mother said the bank had mentioned 250,000. "That's not a renewal. That's not a little. That's 4 times the original line. And they wanted my name behind every dollar of it. Plus," my mother added gently, "whatever you can put in from savings just to show the bank we're serious." I sat there and did the math no one else in that room could do. A $250,000 personal guarantee doesn't just sit in a drawer. It sits on my credit report. It follows me into every mortgage application, every background check, every case I'd ever testify in. It would put my entire financial future behind a store that was hemorrhaging cash and a brother who couldn't keep a till straight. "A guarantee isn't a formality," I said. "It's me promising a bank with my own life that you'll be good for it." My mother smiled like I'd agreed. "Exactly," she said. "And you're so good with all that paperwork." That was the moment I understood. To them, my signature wasn't a question. It was already mine to give and theirs to spend. I told them I needed time to think, and you would have thought I'd set the pot roast on fire. My mother's face went smooth and cold, which is far more dangerous than her yelling. By the next morning, the story was already moving through Hartwell without me in it. My cousin texted to ask if I was really going to let Uncle Glenn lose everything. A woman from my parents' church messaged to say she was praying for the family situation. My mother, it turned out, had spent the week on the phone, building me into a character before I could open my mouth. Tuesday's changed since she moved to the city. Tuesday thinks she's better than us now. Tuesday counts pennies while her own father drowns. She is very good at this. She's been doing it my whole life, just never with this much money on the line. The only person who called to warn me was my Aunt Maureen, my mother's younger sister, the one relative who has never once repeated the family script. "Honey," she said, "your mother is writing the ending before you get to the first chapter. Don't let her." I asked what she meant. Maureen went quiet for a second, the kind of quiet that has 30 years behind it. "There are things about your mother you don't know," she said, "about why she does what she does. We'll talk." Then my mother's voice came through my speaker from a memory of the day before. The line she'd used on a neighbor I happened to overhear. "We gave that girl everything," she'd said. "Sweet as syrup. Now she counts pennies at her own father." I hadn't been given everything. I'd been given a ring of keys. But I was starting to learn that in my family, the truth was whoever told it first. A week later, the invitation came. Not a phone call, not a text, a printed invitation, the kind you order in bulk, with a photo of the storefront on the front. Lowell Hardware, 50 years on Main. There would be a block party on the town square, the street closed off, a barbecue, the high school band, a banner. My parents had invited the whole town and folded into the bottom of the card in smaller letters like an afterthought that was anything but. Also celebrating Tuesday's 35th birthday. We hope she'll help us celebrate the next 50 years together. I read that line 4 times. They had never once thrown me a birthday party. Not at 12, not at 21, not at 30. Brandon got a rented hall when he turned 30. I usually got a phone call sometime after 8 p.m. if my mother remembered. And now suddenly at 35, I was the guest of honor at a party planned around a hardware store anniversary with $250,000 hanging in the air and the word together doing a lot of quiet work. I have built my career on noticing when numbers are arranged to tell a story that isn't true. This was the same skill just pointed at my own family. The party wasn't a celebration. It was a stage. They were going to stand me up in front of everyone I'd ever known, hand me a pen, and dare me to say no while the whole town watched and clapped. My mother had learned somewhere along the way that I would do almost anything to avoid making a scene. She was about to bet $250,000 on it. They weren't throwing me a birthday. They were setting a table. And they'd already written my name on the bill. I didn't call my mother. I called the bank. The line of credit was held at Hartwell Savings, a regional outfit on the corner of Main and 2nd, and the relationship manager on the account was a woman named Renee Ott. I dealt with her 2 years earlier when I signed the original guarantee. She remembered me, which in my experience is what careful people do. I asked her to walk me through exactly how a renewal worked. She didn't rush. "The line matures at the end of May," she said. "It doesn't roll over automatically. To extend it, we rewrite, and the guarantor signs a new agreement." I asked the question that mattered. Could anyone sign that agreement for me? "No," she said, almost amused. "Nobody can sign a personal guarantee on your behalf. That's rather the point of a guarantee. It has to be you in person, wet ink. And if I didn't sign, then there's no qualified guarantor on the renewal." She said, "The business would have to qualify on its own or the line matures and the balance comes due." I asked as neutrally as I could whether the store could qualify on its own. There was a pause, the careful kind. "I can't discuss the borrower standing with you," she said, "but I'd encourage you to think very carefully before you agree to anything." I thanked her and hung up and sat in my condo for a long time, 40 minutes from Hartwell with a parking garage view and a folder in a fireproof drawer. For the first time in my life, I understood the shape of what I'd been carrying. The store didn't run on the Lowell name. It ran on my signature. And a signature is the one thing in this world nobody can take from you. You have to hand it over. And I had just decided that I wouldn't. Brandon called me the following Tuesday, which is its own kind of joke. He never calls me. He wanted to talk plans, not the loan. He'd already filed the loan underdone in his head. He wanted to talk about the remodel, new signage out front, a second register, maybe knocking out the back wall for a contractor pickup lane, whatever that meant. He talked for 10 minutes about a store that didn't have the cash to reorder drill bits. And not once did he ask whether I was going to sign. I let him run the way you let a witness keep talking. Then I asked him plainly about the till coming up short. The nights the cash log didn't match the register tape. He didn't even slow down. "That's nothing," he said. "Sometimes I float myself a little for gas expenses, you know. It's the family store." I asked what a little added up to over a year. He laughed. The easy laugh of a man who has never once balanced a checkbook. "Relax, Tuesday," he said. "You're so dramatic about money. It all comes back around." Then he said the thing he'd been raised to believe, the thing I'd watched him swallow with his cereal for 30 years, and he said it like he was doing me a favor by letting me in on it. "Don't make this weird. The store was always going to be mine." There it was out loud, finally, without the smile to soften it. Not a question of inheritance, a fact in his mind, settled before either of us was born. I said nothing. I'd stopped arguing with Brandon around the time I realized you can't out-talk a man who's never been told no. But I made a note of two things: the missing cash and that consulting line I'd glimpsed in the ledger. And I started to wonder where exactly the store's money was going. My mother's pressure came wrapped in love, the way it always does. She started calling at night when she knew I'd be tired and alone. She talked about my father's heart, the stunt he got in 2021, the way he'd aged 10 years worrying about the store. She told me he wakes up at 4 in the morning and sits at the kitchen table in the dark. She told me this might be the last thing he ever builds. And did I really want to be the reason it fell apart? "You're the only one who can do this," she said, which is the sentence she has used my whole life to mean. You're the only one I expect anything from. My father in all of this stayed silent. He'd get on the phone for 30 seconds, say, "Your mother's right," and hand it back. I used to think that meant he was the soft one, dragged along by her. I was beginning to understand it differently. He let her be the one to push because it kept his hands clean. The resentment underneath it, though, the way his jaw tightened when I talked about my work, the way he changed the subject when anyone mentioned my license or my salary, that was his. All his. My success was a mirror he couldn't stand to look into because it showed him a version of the family where the store wasn't the most important thing a LL could build. "After everything we did for you," my mother said one night, and her voice cracked right on cue, "you'd let strangers take your father's name off that door." I didn't answer. I'd learned that silence was the only thing in our family she couldn't argue with. But I held the phone a long time after she hung up, and I thought about how a person can love you and use you in the very same breath and never feel the difference. I drove out to Hartwell on a Thursday night after closing when I knew the store would be empty. I still had the keys, 12 of them on that brass ring worn smooth from 26 years in my pocket. I let myself in through the front, flipped on the back office light, and left the rest of the store dark. I told my parents I wanted to get a head start on the quarter. That was true. It just wasn't the whole truth. I pulled the cash logs for the past 14 months and laid them next to the register tapes line by line, the way I do it for a client I suspected, and a pattern came up out of the paper like a watermark. The till came up short on a rhythm, never huge, $40 here, 60 there, 80 on a Good Friday, small enough that any one night looked like a careless teenager. But across 14 months, it added up to something that was not careless at all. It was a habit, a system. I thought about my mother's voice in the kitchen all those years ago, the disappointment in it. "You keep receipts on your own family." I sat alone in that pool of office light, surrounded by 50 years of paint cans and key blanks. And I almost laughed. Yes, I kept receipts. Tonight, I was deeply, coldly grateful that I had because the family was asking me to put $250,000 behind a store that was already leaking money out a hole nobody wanted to name. I followed the leak. The shortfalls all traced toward a single expense line I'd glimpsed before and dismissed. A recurring payment labeled consulting going out monthly to a name I didn't recognize. I copied the account number onto a slip of paper, locked up, and drove the 40 minutes back to the city with my hands tight on the wheel. It took me one evening at my kitchen table to find it because the people who hide money from accountants are almost never accountants. The consulting payments were going to a limited liability company registered with the Ohio Secretary of State 11. The filing was public record. I didn't need anything but a website and a cup of coffee. The registered agent, the organizer, the sole member. Every line on the form said the same name, Brandon Lell. My brother had opened a company. Then he'd hired that company to consult for the store and sign the store's checks to himself. 11 months of monthly payments, plus the petty cash skimmed from the till, plus whatever else I hadn't found yet. The store wasn't just losing to the big box chain by the highway. It was being drained from the inside by the golden child everyone was so eager to protect. I leaned back in my chair and let the whole picture settle. My parents were on the phone every night weeping about legacy, begging me to bet my financial life on this store. And the entire time, the man they were doing it to save the store for was the one bleeding it dry. I sat with the obvious question for a while. Did they know? I genuinely didn't know the answer. My mother is capable of looking straight at a thing, and deciding not to see it if seeing it would mean Brandon wasn't perfect. Snorts, my father signs whatever she puts in front of him. Maybe they knew and called it borrowing. Maybe they didn't know and never wanted to. Either way, it didn't change what I had to do. It only changed how much it was going to cost them. I printed the LLC filing, slid it into a new folder, and labeled it the way I label everything, carefully by name. I went back to the store one more time before the party on a Sunday afternoon, when I knew my father would be at the hardware show in Dayton, and Brandon would be anywhere but work. I wanted my own copy of the original loan file, the one in the office, to compare against my records. The desk drawer stuck the way it always had. I jiggled it, pulled, and it gave. And sitting right on top, not even hidden, was a fat manila envelope from Hartwell Savings. I opened it because it had my name on it. Inside was a renewal and increase application already filled out, already printed, the numbers typed clean, $250,000. And on the guarantor line in crisp typed letters was my full legal name, Tuesday A. Lowell. There was a blank beside it waiting for ink. They hadn't asked me. They'd printed me. They had built the entire document around a signature I'd never agreed to give. The way you'd reserve a seat for someone who doesn't know they've been invited. And clipped to the front in my mother's looping handwriting. The handwriting from every birthday card I ever got after 8 p.m. was a yellow sticky note.
I can still see it. Tuesday signs at the party.
Let your father ask in front of everyone. She won't say no with people watching. I stood in that dim office and read it 3 times. And somewhere behind the desk, the tractor calendar hung on the wall with that date still circled twice in red. They weren't planning to ask me. They were planning to perform a question in public, engineered so that the only polite answer was yes. The blank line on that page wasn't waiting for my signature. It was waiting for my silence. The thing I'd given them my whole life. I took out my phone, photographed every page and that note, put the envelope back exactly as I'd found it, and locked the door behind me. Let me stop right here for a second because I know some of you are leaning toward your screens. If you have ever found out that your own family planned something behind your back and put your name on it before you ever said yes, drop a bin there in the comments. I read everyone and tell me honestly, should I have walked into that store and confronted them that night? Stay with me because I didn't pick the loud option. The next morning, I called Renee Ott, and this time I wasn't asking general questions. I told her plainly that I'd seen a renewal and increase application for the Lowell hardware line of credit dated and printed listing me as the guarantor for $250,000. I asked her one thing. Had I authorized that? There was a short silence, the kind a professional takes when she's choosing her words on a recorded line. We received an application from the borrower, she said. It does name you as proposed guarantor, but to be very clear, Miss Lell, a proposed guarantor is not a guarantor. Nothing is binding without your signature. I told her I wanted that in the file in writing. I sent a letter that afternoon drafted with 2 sentences from Paul Stebbins stating that I had not authorized and would not be signing any renewal, extension, or increase of the Lowell hardware credit facility, and that no signature attributed to me should be considered valid unless executed in person in front of bank staff in wet ink. Renee wrote back within the hour confirming receipt, noting it in the file. It was the most boring bureaucratic act of self-defense imaginable. No yelling, no confrontation, just a letter, a confirmation, and a date stamp. But I'd spent my career watching people get ruined because they thought the truth would protect them on its own. The truth doesn't protect you. The record does. I wasn't going to walk into that party and make a speech. I was going to walk and having already, quietly, in writing made my answer a matter of permanent fact. They could perform their question in front of the whole town. The answer was already filed at the bank with a timestamp in language no amount of public clapping could undo. I want to be honest about the temptation because I think you'll understand it. Part of me wanted to drive out to Hartwell, slap the LLC filing on the kitchen table, and watch my mother's face come apart. Part of me wanted to post the whole thing, the skimmed till, the consulting checks, the company in Brandon's name, and let the town do what towns do. I didn't. Not because I'm a saint. I'm not. I didn't. Because I've spent 15 years watching what happens to people who go loud with a half-built case. They tip off the other side. They give the guilty party time to shred, to spin, to cry victim first. I built my file the way I'd build it for a courtroom. Bank statements, not screenshots. The public LLC filing, not gossip. The 14 months of registered tapes against the cash log reconciled and totaled.
No recordings, no diary.
Nothing a defense attorney could call hearsay or a hunch. Just numbers dated and sourced. The kind that don't take sides and don't change their story under pressure. And then I did the hardest thing a person who loves order can do. I waited because I knew something they didn't. A $250,000 increase doesn't get rubber stamped. The bank re-underwrites. They pull the financials. They look the very process my family was so sure would save them was the process, most likely to expose what Brandon had done. And they were marching toward it with a marching band. I didn't need to raise my voice. I needed to stop lending it. So I closed the folder. I let the calendar count down. And I let the machine my family had built come around to meet them. The most devastating thing you can do to people who are counting on your reaction is to simply have none. Aunt Maureen took me to lunch 3 days before the party at a diner 2 towns over where no one would know us. She's my mother's younger sister by 4 years, and she's the only person in the family who has ever talked to me like I was a whole person instead of a function. She stirred her coffee a long time before she started. "You need to understand where your mother comes from," she said. "Or you're going to spend your life thinking it's about you. It isn't." She told me about their childhood, about how their own mother, my grandmother, dead 20 years now, had a favorite. And it wasn't Carol. It was Maureen, the pretty one, the easy one, the one who got the new coat, while Carol got it handed down. "Your mother grew up being the kid nobody picked," Mean said. She swore she'd never do that to her own children, and then she did it anyway. She just flipped it. She made Brandon the chosen one. So hard that she never noticed she'd made Yumi. I sat with that. The cruelty of it almost has a symmetry, doesn't it? The girl who wasn't chosen grew up and chose, and made another little girl carry the keys. "She isn't protecting Brandon," Maureen said. "Not really. She's protecting that little girl nobody picked. Every time she gives him everything, she's giving it to herself." Then she reached across the table and put her hand on mine. "That's the why," she said. "It is not an excuse. Don't you ever let anyone tell you it's an excuse." I didn't cry, but I understood my mother for the first time in 35 years. And the strange thing is, it didn't make me want to sign. It made me certain that I never would. You don't heal a wound by handing it down. You stop it. The night before the party, I sat in my condo and got ready the way I get ready for a deposition. I laid out a plain navy dress on the chair. I charged my phone and I put together a single thin folder, the loan letter to the bank, the LLC filing, the reconciled cash logs, not to wave around, not to perform, but so that if I was accused in front of 200 people of abandoning my father, I would have the truth within arm's reach. I wasn't planning to use it. I was planning to be calm. But I've learned you carry the receipts even when you hope you won't need them. Especially then I thought about everything I'd been my whole life. The one who left. The one who held the keys. The convenient one. The spreadsheet one. The daughter you call when something breaks, and never when something's good. For 35 years, I'd solved their problems quietly in the back office after closing on my own weekends. And I'd told myself that made me loved. It made me useful. Those are not the same thing. And it had taken me far too long to feel the difference in my own chest. Tomorrow, they were going to stand me up in front of the whole town and hand me a pen. And for the first time in my life, the quiet I'd always offered them was going to be the one thing they couldn't survive. I turned off the light. I slept better than I had in weeks. Out in Hartwell, 40 minutes away, my mother was probably ironing a tablecloth and rehearsing my father's lines. Certain the show would go exactly as written. She'd snorts spent $250,000 betting that I'd never make a scene.
She was right about that.
I just wasn't going to make her scene. The town square looked beautiful. I'll give them that. They'd closed off the block in front of a store. String lights crisscrossed Main Street. A barbecue smoked at the curb, and a banner the length of 2 cars read Lowell Hardware. 50 years on Main. Half of Hartwell was there. People I'd gone to high school with now with kids of their own. My father's poker friends. 3 pews worth of churchgoers. and Brandon working the crowd in the green canvas apron with LOL and Sun stitched across the chest in gold, shaking hands like a man accepting an inheritance early. There was a folding table set up near the front draped in a tablecloth with a microphone on a little stand. I parked 2 streets over and walked in, navy dress, thin folder in my bag, and the first thing my mother did when she saw me was take both my hands like we were close.
"There she is," she announced to the people nearby.
Our Tuesday drove all the way out for us. Drove all the way out as if 40 minutes were an ocean, as if I hadn't been driving it for free for a decade. Somebody pressed a paper plate into my hand. Somebody else wished me happy birthday, and then immediately asked when the big remodel was starting. The whole crowd had been told a story, and in that story, I was already a yes. My father stood near the table in his good shirt, and he wouldn't meet my eyes, which is how I knew the script was ready. The high school band finished a song. My mother touched his elbow. He picked up the microphone, tapped it twice, and the square went quiet under the string lights. 50 years, he started, and his voice did the thing it does when he's about to ask for something. 50 years. This family has kept these doors open for this town. Then he turned slow and deliberate and finally looked right at me. And tonight, he said, we keep them open for 50 more together. My mother moved like she'd practiced it because she had. She crossed to the folding table, lifted the tablecloth at one corner, and produced the manila envelope I'd found in the desk drawer. She slid the papers out, smoothed them flat, and set a pen on top. A nice one, the kind you buy for a moment you want people to remember. Then she beckoned me forward with a warm public smile. "Tuesday, honey," she said into the range of the microphone so the front rows could hear. "Come on up. Just a little signature, so your father can sleep at night." The crowd made the sound crowds make that low, encouraging murmur, a smattering of applause already starting, people half turning to watch the daughter do the right thing. I felt every eye in that square land on me at once. It is a specific kind of pressure being asked to be generous in front of the people you grew up with. They engineer it precisely, because most of us would rather sign our lives away than be the villain in front of the church ladies. Brandon drifted over to stand by my father, hands in his apron pocket, grinning. As I stepped toward the table, he leaned into a cousin beside him and said it low, but not low enough. The same words from the phone worn smooth from a lifetime of certainty. "Don't worry," he murmured. "The store was always going to be mine." He said it about a store he was emptying with his own hands. He said it standing in an apron with his name on it in front of a daughter who'd never gotten one. And something about hearing it out loud in public with that pen waiting on the table made the whole thing finally simple for me. My mother held out the pen. The square hushed, waiting for the easy yes they'd all been promised. I looked at the pen, and I didn't take it. "I'm not signing tonight," I said. I didn't whisper it, and I didn't shout it. I said it the way you read a verdict, clear enough for the front rows, even enough that no one could later call me hysterical. My mother's smile froze in place, still aimed at the crowd. "Tuesday," she said through it. "Don't be difficult. It's just a renewal." I shook my head once. "It's not a renewal. It's a $250,000 guarantee." And no. The murmur in the square changed pitch. People who'd been clapping a moment ago went still. Somebody near the barbecue stopped talking mid-sentence. "A guarantee is not a birthday present." And saying so out loud in front of everyone broke the spell my mother had spent 2 weeks casting. She recovered fast, the way she always does, and turned the warmth up. "Sweetheart, your father's worked his whole life."
"I know what he's worked for," I said.
"And I love you." "I do." I let that sit because it was true. And because I wanted the whole square to hear that this wasn't hatred. I love you, and I'm not putting my name behind that loan. Both of those things are true at the same time. It is a strange power, refusing calmly. People are braced for a scene, and when you don't give them one, they don't know where to put their outrage. My father's face had gone a deep mottled red. Brandon's grin had curdled. My mother looked for one unguarded second, genuinely shocked. Not hurt, shocked. The way a person looks when a tool they've used for 35 years suddenly doesn't work in their hand. She'd bet $250,000 that I would rather sign than embarrass them in public. And I had just very quietly in front of the whole town called the bet. My father set down the microphone, which somehow made it worse because everyone leaned in to catch what came next without the speakers. Snorts, he took 2 steps toward me. The string lights buzzed overhead. Up close, I could see his hand shaking. And I understood even then that the shaking wasn't only rage. It was fear. The bone-deep fear of a man watching the one thing his name was attached to start to slip in public with the whole town as witness. He'd built his entire self around being the man who kept Lowell Hardware open. And in front of all of them, his own daughter had just refused to keep building him. His voice came out low and steady, and meant only for me. Though the people closest heard every word, he looked straight into my eyes. The way you look at someone when you want the words to land exactly where they'll do the most damage, and he said it. I wish you were never born. Nobody moved. A woman near the front made a small sound, and covered her mouth. The band kids stared at their shoes. My mother didn't say a word, didn't reach for me, didn't tell him to stop. She just stood there beside the table, and her silence agreed with him louder than anything she could have said. And snorts, here's the part I've thought about most since. I expected it to break me. People always say something inside them shatters. Nothing shattered. Something closed quietly.
Completely.
The way you close a ledger at the end of a year you're glad is over. Every column finally added up. The total sitting there in plain ink. Nothing left to argue. He told me in front of everyone I'd ever known that he wished I didn't exist. So I decided, standing right there, to give him a version of exactly that. I didn't argue. There was nothing left to argue. I didn't cry either. And I want you to know that wasn't strength so much as clarity. You don't weep over a door once you've finally heard it lock. I reached into my bag, and instead of the folder, I took out the brass ring. 12 keys worn smooth. 26 years in my pocket. Front door, stock room, register, safe, back gate. I set them down on the folding table, right on top of the unsigned papers and the nice pen. And the sound they made on the wood was the loudest thing in that silent square. Here, I said, these are yours now. All of them. My father stared at the keys like they were something he'd never seen before. My mother's mouth opened, and nothing came out. Brandon, for once in his life, had stopped grinning. I turned to the crowd. The high school friends, the church ladies, my father's poker buddies, the whole town that had come to watch me say yes. Thank you all for coming out, I said, and I meant it, because manners are the last thing they can take from you. Happy 50th. Then I walked through the middle of them, under the string lights, past the barbecue and the banner, to the corner, and around it to where I'd parked. Nobody followed me. I'd carried those keys since I was 9 years old, since the day my mother decided I was responsible instead of beloved, and setting them down on that table was the lightest I had felt in 26 years. Behind me, I could hear my mother's voice starting up, already spinning, already rewriting the night for the crowd. Let her. I got in my car and made the 40-minute drive back to the city, and I did not look in the rearview mirror once. The next morning, I was awake before the sun, and I moved through my list the way I move through a closing, one item at a time, no wasted motion. First, the money. I had $38,000 in savings, the down payment I'd been building toward a place of my own. And I moved every dollar of it into a new account at a bank my family had no history with, under no shared anything. Not because anyone could legally touch it. They couldn't, but because I wanted a clean line between my future and their emergency. Second, a place. I'd been touring a quiet 2-bedroom across the city for a month, telling myself it was just looking. I signed the lease before 9 a.m. farther out, harder to find with a guest room I had no intention of offering to anyone in Hartwell. Third, and most important, the signature that was never coming. I called Paul Stebbins, and we sent a final formal letter to Hartwell Savings copying Renee Ott. I would not renew, extend, or increase the Lowell Hardware credit facility. The existing guarantee would expire by its own terms at maturity, and any document bearing my name as guarantor on any new or increased facility was unauthorized and void. Certified mail, date stamped, done. Then I turned off my phone, which had 41 missed calls and a voicemail from my mother that started sweet and ended with the word selfish. The long form story people will tell about that morning is that I disappeared. I didn't disappear. Disappearing is what frightened people do. I simply stopped being reachable for emergencies that were never mine to carry. I packed my bags. I moved my money. I found a new place. And I made my no a matter of permanent record. And then for the first quiet morning in my whole life, I made coffee in a kitchen where no one was counting on me to fix anything. I pieced together what happened next from Aunt Morin, who called me every few days with the weather report from Hartwell. At first, my family did what they always do. They waited me out. She's pouting. My mother told the relatives. She'll come around. She always does. Tuesday can't stand loose ends. Brandon texted me twice. Once to call me dramatic. Once to tell me I was really hurting Mom. And then went quiet when I didn't answer. They were so certain I'd fold that they spent the first week doing nothing at all, just circling the date, because the date was coming. That cheap tractor calendar still hung on the office wall. The red circle around the end of May, and now it wasn't a target anymore. It was a fuse. A week after the party, Hartwell Savings sent the borrower a formal notice that the line of credit would mature on schedule and the full balance would come due, and that the pending renewal could not proceed without a qualified guarantor. My father read that letter at the kitchen table at 4 in the morning in the dark, exactly the way my mother had once described him to guilt me, except now there was no daughter on the other end of the phone to fix it. They kept counting the days.
So did I.
They were counting down to the moment I'd finally cave and drive out and sign. I was counting down to the moment the bank's own machinery, the re-underwriting they'd begged me to walk into, reached the part where someone in a back office pulled the store's financials and started to read. My family thought the deadline was a threat hanging over me. They never understood it was a clock I'd already wound, ticking toward a room none of us had walked into yet. Quick question while that clock keeps ticking. If your family had built a public trap to make you pay, and then your own father said those words over the birthday cake, would you drive back out and explain yourself one more time, or would you let the silence finish the job? Type explain or silence. I genuinely read every comment. Now stay with me because the bank's calendar was about to do the one thing I never had to do myself. The maturity date came, and the line of credit didn't renew because there was no qualified guarantor to sign it, and there was never going to be again. My parents found this out the hard way in stages, the way people always learn things they refuse to plan for. First, the bank stopped honoring new charges on the line. Then the full balance came due. $60,000 all at once on a store that couldn't cover 3 months of payables. My father did what desperate men do. He tried to refinance somewhere else. He drove to a bank one town over, then another, sat across from loan officers in his good shirt, and got the same answer every time. The store's financials didn't support new credit. Revenue down a third, payables stacked deep, and a cash flow hole that any underwriter could see from across the room. No bank in the state was going to lend into that without a guarantor. And the only guarantor they'd ever had was a 40-minute drive away in a new apartment, not answering her phone. I felt the shape of it through Morin's updates, and I'd be lying if I said I felt nothing. I felt the specific quiet vindication of a person who has been told for 35 years that her caution was cruelty. Watching the things she warned about arrive exactly on schedule. For 2 years they'd told the whole town that Lowell Hardware stood on 50 years and a family name. Now they were finding out in front of every loan officer in the county what the store had actually been standing on the whole time. It wasn't the name over the door. It wasn't my father's 50 years. It was one signature from the daughter they wished had never been born, and she had stopped lending it. My mother went to war the only way she knows how, with a story. She posted online a long, weepy paragraph about ungrateful children and the pain of building something your own family won't help you save. Megan, Brandon's wife, shared it with 3 crying emojis and a line about people who forget where they came from. For a day, it worked the way it always had. A few sympathetic comments, a neighbor or 2 clutching pearls. But this time, there was the problem my mother hadn't accounted for. Half the town had been standing in that square. They heard my father say it. And grief is a hard sell to people who watched you put the knife in. The comments started turning. Someone wrote gently, "Carol, didn't Glenn say something awful to her at the party?" Someone else, less gently, "My wife was there. That poor girl." And then Aunt Morin, who had spent her whole life keeping the peace, stopped keeping it. She commented under my mother's post in public for everyone to read. My sister left out a few things. She wrote, Tuesday saved that store 2 years ago when nobody else could. She did the books for free for 10 years. And the night of the party, her father looked her in the eye in front of the whole town and told her he wished she'd never been born. You want sympathy?
Tell them that part.
My mother deleted the post within the hour. But you can't delete a town's memory, and you can't unring a bell that 200 people heard at once. The narrative she'd controlled my entire life, the one where I was cold and she was wronged, finally slipped out of her hands. And once a story like that starts coming apart in public, it doesn't stop at the part you'd like it to. Renee called me a few days later. She was professional, careful, exactly as she'd always been. The bank, she said, had scheduled a meeting with the borrower to discuss the matured facility and some findings from the renewal review. As a named party on the original guarantee, I was entitled to attend. She wasn't asking me to come. She was telling me I could. I thought about it for one full day. Then I put on the navy dress again, and I drove the 40 minutes out to Hartwell, and I walked into the Hartwell Savings branch on the corner of Main and 2nd with my thin folder under my arm. The conference room had a long table and a wall of glass, and the kind of fluorescent light that makes everyone look like they've been crying whether they have or not. They were all already there when I came in. My mother in her church clothes. My father gray-faced, smaller than I remembered. Brandon, jittery, his foot bouncing under the table. Megan beside him. And I hadn't expected this. Aunt Maureen in the back, who gave me one small nod that did more for me than any speech could have. Renee sat at the head with a man named Harrove, the branch manager, and 2 thick folders squared neatly in front of them. There was a calendar on that wall, too, a bank one. All business, no tractor. And the date it was open to, the date with no circle because it didn't need one, was today. The maturity date, the day the clock I'd wound a month ago, finally ran all the way down. My family looked at me when I walked in with the same expectation they'd had at the party, that I was here finally to cave to sign to fix it the way I always fixed it, quietly in a back room on my own time. My mother even smiled a little. She thought I'd come to surrender. I'd come to be in the room when the truth did. Renee opened the meeting plainly. The line of credit matured today, she said. The full balance is due. The renewal cannot proceed without a qualified guarantor signature, and we've received written notice that the previously named guarantor is not signing. Every head turned to me. I said the only thing I'd come to say evenly, hands folded on my folder. I'm not signing. That's correct. My mother's voice cracked right on cue. Tuesday, you're killing your father. She reached for the manipulative tears, the ones that had worked for 35 years. I just held still. You can't argue with someone who refuses to perform. And I had decided long before that room not to perform. Then Renee turned a page and continued in the same level tone, and the room changed temperature.
There's a second matter, she said.
During the renewal review, our underwriting flagged a pattern of cash discrepancies in the store's deposits over the past 14 months, along with recurring payments from the business to an outside company. That company is registered to one of the account's authorized signers. She didn't say his name. She didn't have to. Brandon went the color of paper. Before this bank extends any credit, Renee said, those findings have to be resolved. And that's when the calm in the room broke. But it didn't break on my side of the table. It broke on theirs. Brandon shot to his feet, knocking his chair. She's lying. Tuesday set this up because she's jealous. She's always been jealous. My father put his face in his hands. My mother turned on me, the tears gone, her voice low and venomous. You always did keep receipts on your own family. She meant it one last time as a wound. I looked at her, and for the first time in my life, I answered the sentence she'd been using against me since I was a child. Yes, I said. I do. It's the only reason all of this is on the record, and not on me. Harrove, the branch manager, cleared his throat and brought the room back to the only language a bank speaks. The facility had matured. The balance was due. The collateral on the original guarantee was the store's own inventory and fixtures, not my home, not my savings, only what the business itself had pledged. To satisfy the debt, those assets would be liquidated, and the discrepancy findings would be referred for review before the borrower could be considered for anything new. He said it the way professionals say hard things, without cruelty and without mercy, just facts laid in a row. My father didn't argue. He'd gone somewhere quiet inside himself. The gray-faced quiet of a man who has just understood that the thing he built will be sold to pay for the thing his son took. Brandon was still talking, still pointing at me, still calling it jealousy, until Harov said evenly that perhaps Brandon should speak with his own attorney, and the room finally went silent around him. I stood up. I had one thing to say, and I'd known the shape of it for weeks. I looked at my mother and then at my father, and I kept my voice as level as a ledger.
I'll always love you, I said.
And I will never again be the name you sign your mistakes against. Those aren't the same thing, and I'm done pretending they are. Aunt Mean rose with me. Renee gave me the smallest professional nod, the nod of a careful person to another careful person, and said, "Thank you for coming in, Miss Lell." I picked up my folder, the one I never even had to open, and I walked out of that glass room into the May afternoon. 40 minutes later, I was home in a kitchen where no one was counting on me, and I have not driven back to Hartwell since. Lowell Hardware closed in August. The inventory was liquidated to satisfy the matured loan. The fixtures sold to a salvage outfit. The key cutting machine bought by a man who runs a shop 2 towns over. The new owner of the building gutted it for a physical therapy clinic. And the first thing he did, Morin told me, was call a locksmith and rekey every door. So the only set of keys that ever mattered, the brass ring I'd carried since I was 9, opened nothing at all anymore. Brandon's company didn't survive the daylight. The skimming and the consulting checks became a matter between him, the bank, and eventually a lawyer. And the golden child spent the fall learning what consequences feel like for the first time in 32 years. The aprons, including the green one with Lowell and Son stitched in gold, ended up in a 50 bin at the estate sale, and I'm told nobody bought them. My parents downsized to a rental on the edge of town. Snorts. The whole county knows the real story now. My mother stopped going to that church. And my father, the man who wished I'd never been born, sent me exactly one message in October, 6 words long. I shouldn't have said that. Sorry, I haven't answered it yet. Maybe I will. Maybe an apology that small, that late, deserves a reply just as small and just as careful. But I'm not in any hurry, and I no longer feel like I owe anyone my weekends to prove it. The store was never always going to be Brandon's. It turned out the store was never really anyone's except the bank's, and for 2 short years mine. And I gave it back the only way that ever would have stuck, by keeping my own name. For most of my life, I believed that love meant being the one who always signed, the one who fixed it quietly and never sent the bill. But I've learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for them and for you both is to set the pen down, keep your own name to yourself, and walk out while you can still recognize the hand that's holding it. That's my story.